The bank ledger showed $3.27 where there should have been nearly $2,000, and Hannah Foster's hands trembled so violently she had to set the paper down on the polished mahogany desk before she dropped it entirely. She had walked into the First National Bank of Georgetown, Colorado, on a crisp October morning in 1876, expecting to withdraw funds for the winter supplies their modest ranch would need, only to discover that her husband Thomas had emptied their account 3 weeks prior. "Mrs. Foster, perhaps you should sit down," the bank manager said, his weathered face creasing with concern as he watched the color drain from her cheeks. Hannah's knees buckled slightly, but she locked them, refusing to show weakness in front of the half-dozen other customers conducting their business. Her mind raced through the possibilities, each one more terrible than the last. Thomas had been making frequent trips to Denver over the past 2 months, claiming he was negotiating better prices for their cattle. She had believed him because she had always believed him, because in 8 years of marriage he had never given her reason to doubt. "There must be some mistake," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband would never withdraw that much without telling me." The manager shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from hers. "Madam, I am truly sorry, but there is no mistake. Mr. Foster came in himself, signed all the proper paperwork. It was his legal right to do so." Those last words struck her like a physical blow. His legal right, because everything they owned, everything she had worked for, was legally his property by virtue of their marriage. The ranch they had built together from nothing, the cattle she had helped raise, the money she had saved from selling eggs and butter to the miners' wives, all of it belonged to Thomas in the eyes of the law. "Did he say what he needed it for?" Hannah asked, knowing she was grasping at straws but unable to stop herself. The manager's expression grew even more uncomfortable. "I am not at liberty to discuss a customer's private business, Mrs. Foster. I can only tell you what remains in your account." Hannah took the ledger slip from the desk, folded it carefully, and placed it in her reticule. She walked out of the bank with her spine straight and her head high, refusing to let anyone see how completely her world had just shattered. The autumn air felt sharp against her face as she stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, and she drew in a deep breath, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. Georgetown sprawled before her in the valley between the mountains, its streets busy with miners, merchants, and the constant traffic of wagons hauling silver ore from the surrounding mines. The town had grown rapidly since the silver strikes of the late 1860s, transforming from a rough mining camp into a proper town with churches, schools, and brick buildings that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Hannah and Thomas had arrived 5 years ago, using her small inheritance from her father to buy a modest ranch on the outskirts where they could raise cattle and horses to sell to the mines and the growing population. She walked slowly toward the general store where she had left her wagon, her mind working through the immediate practicalities. Winter was coming, and she corrected herself bitterly, she had almost nothing. $3 would not buy the flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples she would need. It would not pay for the feed the animals would require when the snow came. It would not repair the roof that leaked in the northwest corner of the house. Thomas had not been home for 4 days now, and she had assumed he was still in Denver, but now a cold certainty settled in her stomach. He was not coming back. Men did not empty their bank accounts and disappear unless they had no intention of returning. Hannah reached the store and stood beside her wagon, one hand resting on the weathered wood as she stared unseeing at the mountain peaks towering above the town. She needed to think, to plan, but her thoughts kept fragmenting, returning again and again to the central, devastating question. Why? "Mrs. Foster, are you all right?" She turned to find Albert Norwood standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands and concern evident in his dark eyes. He was a tall man, lean and weathered from years of outdoor work, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that touched his collar. She knew him by sight and reputation, a cowboy who worked for the Lazy H Ranch north of town, though they had never spoken more than a few words in passing. "I am fine, thank you," Hannah said automatically, the lie coming easily after years of social conditioning that demanded women always present a pleasant facade. Albert did not move away. He studied her face for a long moment, and whatever he saw there made him frown. "Forgive me for being forward, madam, but you do not look fine. You look like you have had some bad news." The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "It is nothing I cannot handle, Mr. Norwood. Please do not concern yourself." "I reckon most people would say the same thing even if they were drowning," Albert said quietly. He glanced around the busy street, then back at her. "There is a respectable restaurant just down the street. Maybe you could use a cup of coffee and someone to talk to who is not inclined to gossip." Hannah knew she should refuse, knew that being seen having coffee with a single man could damage her reputation. But her reputation was likely already in tatters if Thomas had done what she feared, and she desperately needed someone to talk to, someone who might offer practical advice rather than sympathy and judgment. "Thank you," she said. "That would be kind." The restaurant was clean and quiet at this mid-morning hour, with only a few customers scattered among the tables. Albert selected a corner table that offered some privacy and pulled out her chair before seating himself across from her. When the waitress came, he ordered coffee and asked if the lady might like something to eat. Hannah started to refuse, then realized she had not eaten breakfast. Her stomach had been too unsettled even then, though she had not known why. "Toast, please, with butter." When the waitress left, Albert folded his hands on the table and waited, not pushing, just offering silent support through his presence. Hannah found herself studying him properly for the first time. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw and straight nose. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel like she could trust him, even though they were virtual strangers. "My husband has left me," she said abruptly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "He emptied our bank account and disappeared. I just found out at the bank." Albert's expression darkened. "How much did he take?" "Nearly $2,000, everything we had." He let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable sum. Have you contacted the sheriff?" "To what purpose?" Hannah asked bitterly. "The money was legally his. The bank manager made that very clear. I have no legal recourse." "The law is not always the same as justice," Albert said. "Still, you are right that it would likely do no good. Do you have any idea where he went or why?" Hannah shook her head. "He claimed he was going to Denver on business. He has been making trips there for the past 2 months. I thought—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice the humiliating suspicion that was growing stronger by the moment. "You thought he was working," Albert finished gently. "But now you think there might have been another reason?" The coffee arrived, and Hannah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "The bank manager acted very strangely, very uncomfortable. He would not look at me. I think he knows something he did not want to tell me." Albert took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "There are ways to find out what happened to a man in Denver, if you want to know." "I am not sure I do," Hannah admitted. "What difference would it make? The money is gone, and apparently so is my husband. Knowing the details will not change those facts." "Maybe not," Albert agreed. "But it might help you figure out your next steps. Right now, you are operating in the dark, making assumptions. Information is valuable, even when it hurts." The toast arrived, and Hannah forced herself to take a bite, chewing mechanically. Albert was right, of course. She needed to know the full situation before she could make any plans. But first, she had more immediate concerns. "I have $3 to my name," she said quietly. "I have a ranch with cattle and horses, but I cannot pay for winter supplies or feed. I cannot make the loan payment that comes due at the end of the month. I do not know what I'm going to do." Albert leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "How much land do you have?" 80 acres, about 40 head of cattle, and 6 horses. The land is mortgaged and I still owe $800 on it. "And without supplies, you cannot make it through winter," Albert said, thinking aloud. "But come spring, those cattle would be worth good money, especially with the mines always needing beef." "Spring might as well be a lifetime away," Hannah said. "I need solutions for now." Albert was quiet for a moment, clearly turning something over in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "I have some money saved up. Not a fortune, but enough to help you get through winter if you are careful. I could loan it to you." Hannah stared at him in shock. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." "I know enough," Albert said simply. "I know you work hard. I have seen you in town, always handling business, always capable. I know you did not deserve this, and I know that sometimes people need a hand up when they are down." "I could not possibly accept," Hannah said, even as part of her wanted desperately to say yes. I have no way to pay you back, not with certainty. Then do not think of it as a loan, Albert said. Think of it as an investment. I help you get through winter and get your ranch back on solid footing. In return, maybe I could work your land with you, help you build it up. When you start turning a profit, we split it fairly. Partnership, not charity. Hannah's mind raced through the implications. It was an unorthodox arrangement, certainly, and people would talk. A married woman going into business partnership with a single man would be scandalous enough. If Thomas really had abandoned her, it would be even worse. But what choice did she have? She could sell the ranch, but at a forced sale she would get a fraction of its value, probably not even enough to cover the mortgage. She would be left with nothing, dependent on charity, or forced to seek work as a laundry woman or domestic servant. Why would you want to do this? She asked. What is in it for you, really? Albert met her gaze steadily. I have been working as a hired hand for 8 years, since I was 21. I am good at what I do, but I do not own anything except my horse and my saddle. I have been saving money, trying to build up enough to buy my own place, but land prices keep rising faster than I can save. This way, I get a chance to build something, to work land that could be truly productive with the right management. And I help someone who deserves help. Seems like a fair trade to me. Hannah took another bite of toast, using the time to think. Everything about this was risky and improper. But Albert was right about one thing. She needed help, and she needed it now. The alternative was losing everything. If we did this, she said slowly, it would have to be a proper business arrangement. Everything documented and legal. I will not be dependent on anyone's goodwill again. Agreed, Albert said immediately. We can have a lawyer draw up papers, everything clear and binding. And you would need to understand that people will talk. It could damage both our reputations. Let them talk, Albert said with a slight shrug. I have never cared much for gossip, and I doubt you have the luxury of caring about it now. He was right about that. Hannah took a deep breath and extended her hand across the table. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Norwood. Partnership. Albert shook her hand, his grip warm and firm. Partnership. And please call me Albert. If we are going to be working together, we might as well skip the formalities. Hannah, she said, though in public, perhaps we should maintain proprieties. Mrs. Foster in public, Hannah, when we are working, Albert agreed. Now, let us make some plans. We need to figure out exactly what you need to get through winter and what work needs to be done at the ranch. They spent the next hour at the table, Hannah sketching out the situation at the ranch, while Albert asked detailed questions about the cattle, the buildings, the water supply, and a dozen other practical matters. His questions revealed a depth of knowledge about ranching that impressed her. This was not just a cowboy looking for his next paycheck. This was a man who understood the business from the ground up. The first thing we need to do is get you supplied for winter, Albert said. Food, feed, fuel, basic necessities. I reckon that will run about $300 if we are careful. Then we need to shore up that roof before the snow comes and make sure your livestock has proper shelter. I can do most of that work myself, but we will need materials, maybe another $100. That leaves you short for your mortgage payment. Which means I will lose the ranch anyway, Hannah said, despair creeping back into her voice. Not necessarily, Albert said. When is the payment due? November 1st, 3 weeks from now. And how much is it? $150. Albert did some mental arithmetic. So you need $550 minimum to make it through. I have $400 saved. It is not quite enough. Hannah felt her brief hope deflate. $400 was generous, more than generous, but it still left them $150 short. Unless, Albert said slowly, we can find a way to raise the extra money quickly. What about those horses? Are any of them broke to saddle or harness? 4 of them are, Hannah said. 2 are still green, and 1 is a broodmare. Good horses fetch premium prices in mining country, Albert mused. If we sold 2 of the trained horses, that might give us the extra we need. But I need those horses, Hannah protested. For working the ranch, for getting to town. You need 2 horses, maybe 3 at most, Albert countered. And horses can be replaced. You cannot replace land or cattle if you lose the ranch. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the less important to save the more important. He was right, and Hannah knew it, but it still hurt. Those horses represented years of work, of training and care. But they were just animals, and the ranch was her future. All right, she said. We sell 2 horses, but I want to choose which ones. Fair enough, Albert agreed. I know a man who deals in horses, supplies the stage company and some of the bigger ranches. He pays fair prices. I can take you to him this afternoon if you like. They finished their coffee and walked back to where Hannah's wagon was still parked by the general store. Albert went to fetch his horse while Hannah waited, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning she had been a married woman with a modest but secure future. Now she was apparently abandoned, nearly destitute, and entering into a business partnership with a man she had only just met. It was terrifying and overwhelming, but it was also something else. It was hers. For the first time in her adult life, she was making decisions about her own future, not following a father's dictates or a husband's plans. Albert returned riding a handsome bay gelding and tied it to the back of her wagon. I will drive, if that is all right with you. That way you can rest a bit. You look exhausted. Hannah wanted to protest that she was fine, but the truth was she felt drained, wrung out by the emotional upheaval of the morning. She climbed up to the wagon seat, and Albert settled beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. The ride out to the ranch took about 45 minutes, following the rutted road that wound through the valley. Hannah found herself watching Albert covertly as he drove. His hands on the reins were steady and sure, and he handled the team with quiet competence. There was something calming about his presence, a sense of reliability that she desperately needed right now. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said as they passed the halfway point. "Of course. Why did you really offer to help me? There must be a dozen other opportunities for a man with your skills and savings." Albert was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "I suppose the simple answer is that it felt like the right thing to do. But if you want the fuller truth, I saw my own mother go through something similar when I was 15. My father died in a ranch accident, and the vultures descended before he was even cold in the ground. The banker, the land office, even some of our neighbors, all of them trying to take advantage of a widow who did not know her legal rights. We lost everything. My mother had to take in laundry to support us, and she worked herself into an early grave doing it. I was too young then to help much, but I swore that if I ever had the chance to help a woman in a similar situation, I would." Hannah felt a lump form in her throat. "I am sorry about your mother." "It was a long time ago," Albert said quietly, "but it taught me some valuable lessons about who people really are when times get hard, the ones who help and the ones who exploit." "And which are you?" Hannah asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I am sorry, that was rude." "No, it is a fair question," Albert said. "I would like to think I am the former, but I suppose time will tell. I can promise you this, though. Everything between us will be honest and above board. You will always know exactly where you stand with me." The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and Hannah felt her chest tighten. The house was small but sturdy, built of logs with a covered porch across the front. The barn and corrals were well maintained, the fences straight and strong. She and Thomas had built this together, working from dawn to dusk to make it a success. Now it was just hers, if she could manage to keep it. Albert pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Hannah down. The horses in the corral whinnied at the sight of the wagon, hoping for feed. The cattle were scattered across the nearer pastures, grazing on the brown autumn grass. "It is a good piece of land," Albert said, looking around with an appraising eye. "Good water, decent grass, protected from the worst winds. You have built something solid here." "We did," Hannah said, then corrected herself. "I did. I keep forgetting that there is no we anymore." "That will take time to adjust to," Albert said gently. "For now, let us take a look at those horses and figure out which ones we should sell." They spent the next hour going over the horses, with Albert evaluating each one critically but fairly. In the end, they decided to sell a 6-year-old gelding and a 5-year-old mare, both well-trained and even-tempered. They would bring good prices, Albert assured her, possibly even more than they needed. "I will take them into town tomorrow," Albert said. "Talk to the dealer I mentioned. With luck, we will have your money by tomorrow evening." "What about your job at the Lazy H?" Hannah asked. "Will not they object to you being gone?" "I will talk to the foreman tonight. Let him know I'm moving on," Albert said. "I have been thinking about leaving anyway. This is just the push I needed." "You are burning your bridges very quickly for someone you just met," Hannah observed. Albert smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Sometimes the right opportunity comes along, and you just know. This feels right to me. Does it feel right to you? Hannah considered the question seriously. By all logic, she should be terrified of this arrangement, should be refusing help from a stranger. But instead, she felt a sense of cautious hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this disaster and even emerge stronger. Yes, she said. It feels right. Albert left before dark, promising to return the next morning with his belongings and ready to start work. Hannah watched him ride away, then turned to face the empty house. For the first time since she had learned of Thomas's betrayal, she let herself cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the loss of her marriage, for the death of her trust, for the fear and uncertainty of her future. She cried until she had no tears left, until she felt hollow and empty. Then she washed her face in cold water, built up the fire, and made herself a simple supper. She was not defeated. She was angry and hurt and scared, but she was not defeated. Tomorrow she would start building her new life, and she would do it on her own terms. Albert arrived just after dawn the next morning, leading a pack horse loaded with his belongings. Hannah was already up, having barely slept, and was feeding the chickens when he rode up. "Morning," he called. "I brought some supplies from my own stores. Figured we could save a bit of money that way." "That is kind of you," Hannah said, wiping her hands on her apron. "There is coffee on the stove, if you want some." They had breakfast together at her kitchen table, an oddly domestic scene that would have shocked the neighbors had they known. Albert ate with the efficiency of a working man, not wasting time, but not rushing either. Hannah found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. Whatever else might happen, at least she was not alone anymore. After breakfast, Albert loaded the 2 horses they had selected into a temporary pen attached to the wagon. "I will head into town now, see about selling these. If all goes well, I will be back by late afternoon. Is there anything else you need while I'm there?" Hannah made a quick list of essentials, things they would need immediately. Albert studied it and nodded. "I can get all this. We will save the bigger supply run until after we know exactly how much money we have to work with." He left, and Hannah threw herself into work, needing the physical activity to keep her mind from dwelling on her situation. She mucked out the barn, fed and watered the livestock, and spent 2 hours working on a torn section of fence. The work was hard and dirty, but she had never been afraid of either. She had grown up on a farm in eastern Colorado, the daughter of a wheat farmer who had believed that all his children, daughters included, should know how to work hard. Albert returned in late afternoon, and Hannah could tell from his expression that the news was good. "Sold them both," he said, climbing down from the wagon. "Got $200 for the pair. Your horses were well trained, and that made all the difference." Combined with his savings, they now had $600, enough to cover everything they needed with a small cushion left over. Hannah felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she said. "I know I have already said it, but thank you. I would be completely lost without your help." "We are partners now," Albert said. "Your success is my success. Now, let us go over the books so I know exactly what we are dealing with." They spent the evening going through all the ranch's finances, with Hannah explaining every detail. Thomas had always handled the money, but Hannah had kept careful records of everything, a habit from her father, who had believed that women should understand finances even if the law gave them no control over them. Albert asked intelligent questions and made notes, building up a clear picture of the ranch's assets and liabilities. "You have been managing this place well," he said when they finished. "The problem was not poor management. It was just that you needed more capital to grow. With 2 people working instead of 1, and with careful planning, I think we can turn this into a truly profitable operation." "What do you suggest?" Hannah asked. Albert pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began sketching ideas. "Right now, you are selling cattle for beef, which is good, steady income. But the real money is in breeding stock. Those mines will be here for years, maybe decades, and they will need cattle. If we can build up a reputation for quality breeding stock, we can command premium prices. Same with horses. Instead of just breaking wild horses to saddle, we could breed our own, raise them from colts, train them properly. That takes time, but the payoff is much higher." Hannah listened as Albert laid out his vision, and she felt excitement building despite herself. He was right. She had been thinking too small, too focused on immediate survival to plan for real growth. With a partner, with someone to share the work and the planning, so much more became possible. They talked late into the night, building plans and strategies, until Hannah finally realized it was past midnight. "You must be exhausted," she said, "and I have not even shown you where you will sleep. The bunkhouse needs some work, but it is weatherproof." "I can sleep anywhere," Albert assured her. "Years on the trail teach you not to be particular." Hannah showed him to the small bunkhouse behind the barn. It was dusty and had clearly not been used in some time, but it had a good stove, a solid bunk, and a table and chair. "I will bring out some bedding," she said, "and we should get a proper mattress for that bunk." "This is luxury compared to some places I have stayed," Albert said with a smile. "Do not worry about me. I will be fine." That night, lying alone in her bed, Hannah thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been a wife, if an apparently unhappy one. Now she was a partner in a business venture with a man who was nearly a stranger. It should have felt wrong, should have felt scandalous and improper. Instead, it felt like the first truly free choice she had made since she was 18 years old and had agreed to marry Thomas Foster. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work. They made their supply run, stocking up on everything they would need for winter. Albert proved to be as good as his word, working from dawn until dark repairing buildings, mending fences, and caring for the livestock. Hannah worked alongside him, grateful for his steady presence and his wealth of practical knowledge. True to his promise, Albert drew up a partnership agreement and had a lawyer in town look it over. The document was clear and fair. Albert had contributed $400 to the operation, while Hannah contributed the land, livestock, and buildings. They would split all profits and expenses evenly, and either party could buy out the other's share at a fair market price if the partnership dissolved. "This protects both of us," the lawyer explained to Hannah when she came in to sign. "If something happens to either of you, the other has clear legal rights." "And what about my husband?" Hannah asked quietly. "He has been gone for over 3 weeks now. Does he have any claim to this?" The lawyer frowned. "Legally, as your husband, he has claim to anything you own. However, if you can demonstrate that he has abandoned you, and if you can prove that the capital for this partnership came from Mr. Norwood, rather than from marital assets, you might have grounds to protect it. It would be better, though, if you knew for certain what his situation was." Hannah had been trying not to think about Thomas, trying to focus on the work and the future rather than the painful past. But the lawyer's words reminded her that she could not simply ignore the question forever. "Is there any way to find out what happened to him?" she asked. "Without hiring an expensive investigator?" The lawyer leaned back in his chair. "There might be. Let me make some inquiries. I have contacts in Denver. If your husband has been conducting business there, someone might know something." 2 weeks later, just as they were making the mortgage payment and congratulating themselves on surviving the first crisis, the lawyer sent word that he wanted to see Hannah. She rode into town with a sense of dread, knowing that whatever news he had was unlikely to be good. "Mrs. Foster," the lawyer said when she arrived at his office, "please sit down. I have news about your husband, and I am afraid it is not pleasant." Hannah sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Tell me." "Your husband is in Denver. He has been there for the past 2 months, and he used your savings to set up a business, a saloon. More significantly, he has been living there with another woman, a woman he has been introducing as his wife." The words hit Hannah like physical blows, even though she had suspected something of the sort. Hearing it confirmed made it real, in a way her suspicions had not. "Is he married to her?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible. "Not legally, no, he cannot be, since he is still married to you. But he is representing himself as unmarried and representing her as his wife. That, combined with his abandonment of you, gives you grounds for divorce if you choose to pursue it." Divorce. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with social and religious implications. Divorced women were scandalous, objects of pity and gossip, but they were also free. "What would that involve?" Hannah asked. "It would require you to file a petition with the territorial court. Given the circumstances, desertion, and possible adultery, you would likely be granted a divorce. The judge might even award you a portion of the marital assets, though given that your husband has already spent most of them, that may be a hollow victory. How long would it take? Several months, possibly longer. The courts are backed up, and your husband would need to be served with papers. If he contests it, it could take even longer." Hannah thought about this. Several months of uncertainty, of being neither properly married nor properly free. But at the end of it, she would be her own woman, legally as well as practically. "I want to proceed," she said firmly. "I want a divorce." The lawyer nodded. "I will begin drawing up the papers. This will cost money, Mrs. Foster. Legal fees, court costs, probably around $50 all told." $50 was a significant sum, but Hannah did not hesitate. "I will pay it. This is worth the cost." When she returned to the ranch and told Albert what she had learned, his face darkened with anger. "The man is a coward and a thief. You deserve better." "Apparently the universe agrees with you, since it sent you along," Hannah said, trying to make light of it even though her heart ached. Albert looked at her seriously. "I am glad I could help, but Hannah, you need to know something. I did not offer to help you just because it was the right thing to do, or just because I saw a business opportunity." Hannah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have been watching you for months, ever since I first saw you in town last spring. I have admired you, the way you handle yourself, your strength and capability. When I saw you at the bank looking so devastated, I knew I had to help. But it was not just altruism. I wanted a reason to be near you, to get to know you." Hannah stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Albert, I am still married. Even if I am filing for divorce, even if my husband has betrayed me, I am still legally his wife." "I know," Albert said quietly. "And I am not asking for anything you cannot give. I am just being honest about my motivations. I will wait as long as necessary. If you want me to leave once the partnership has run its course, I will do that. But I hope you will let me stay, and I hope that when you are free, you might consider allowing me to court you properly." Hannah felt a flood of emotions: confusion, fear, hope, and something else. Something warm that she was not ready to name yet. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything now," Albert said. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. For now, let us focus on the ranch and getting through winter. Everything else can wait." But, of course, everything else could not wait, at least not entirely. As the weeks turned into months and winter settled over the mountains, Hannah found herself increasingly aware of Albert's presence. They worked side by side every day, and she came to rely on his judgment and his steady support. More than that, she came to enjoy his company. He was intelligent and well-read, with strong opinions about everything from politics to philosophy. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours, discussing books, debating ideas, sharing stories from their pasts. Hannah had never had this kind of intellectual companionship with Thomas. Her husband had been practical and hardworking, but he had not been interested in ideas or discussions. She had not realized how much she had missed having someone to truly talk to until Albert came into her life. The divorce proceedings moved slowly, hampered by the difficulty of serving Thomas with papers. He apparently learned what was happening and briefly tried to contest it, claiming that Hannah had no grounds. But the evidence of his abandonment and his cohabitation with another woman was too strong, and eventually he stopped fighting. The judge granted the divorce in late March of 1877, nearly 6 months after Hannah had first discovered Thomas's betrayal. When the lawyer brought her the final papers, Hannah held them in her hands and felt a confusing mix of relief and grief. She was free. Truly free for the first time in her adult life. But freedom had come at a tremendous cost. "Are you all right?" Albert asked that evening when she showed him the papers. "I think so," Hannah said slowly. "It feels strange, like closing a book I never finished reading." "Maybe some books are not meant to be finished," Albert said. "Maybe some stories are better ended early so new ones can begin." Spring came late to the Colorado mountains, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. The snow melted, the grass greened, and the cattle that had survived winter grew sleek and fat. Hannah and Albert had worked hard to keep everything running through the cold months, and their efforts had paid off. They had not lost a single head of cattle, and the horses had all wintered well. As the weather warmed, they began implementing the plans they had discussed during those long winter evenings. Albert took 3 of the younger horses and spent hours each day training them, while Hannah focused on improving the cattle herd. They traded some of their less productive cows for a prime bull from a ranch in the next valley, a significant investment, but one that would pay dividends in the quality of future calves. The work was hard, but Hannah found herself happier than she had been in years. She woke each morning with a sense of purpose, eager to see what the day would bring, and if she found herself watching Albert more than was strictly necessary, if she felt a flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, Well, she was divorced now. There was no longer any impropriety in such feelings. Albert, true to his word, did not push. He treated her with consistent respect and kindness, never presuming on their living arrangement or trying to take advantage of her newly single status. But Hannah could feel the current of attraction between them, growing stronger as the weeks passed. It was a warm evening in late April when things finally changed. They had spent the day repairing a section of fence damaged by winter weather, hard physical labor under the spring sun. After supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "It is beautiful here," Albert said quietly. "I think this might be the most beautiful place I have ever lived." "I have always loved it," Hannah agreed. "Even when things were difficult, the mountains made it bearable." Albert turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Hannah, you know how I feel about you. I told you months ago, and those feelings have only grown stronger. Now that you are free, I would like permission to court you properly. I know it is soon, and I know people will talk, but I do not want to waste time pretending I feel differently than I do." Hannah's heart raced. She had known this moment was coming, had been both anticipating and dreading it. "Albert, I care about you. I think you know that. But I am afraid." "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of making another mistake, of trusting someone again only to be betrayed, of losing myself in another person's expectations and demands." She paused, struggling to articulate fears she barely understood herself. "I have only just discovered who I am when I am not someone's wife, someone's property. I am not sure I am ready to risk that independence again." Albert reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I am not Thomas. I would never try to control you or take away your independence. The woman I have fallen in love with is strong and capable and fiercely independent. I do not want to change that. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word, not your master." "How can I be sure?" Hannah whispered. "You cannot," Albert said honestly. "There are no guarantees in life, but I can promise you this. I will spend every day proving that you can trust me. I will respect your choices, value your opinions, and treat you as my equal in all things. And if you decide that you are happier alone, I will respect that too, even though it would break my heart." Hannah looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. She thought about the past 6 months, about how Albert had kept every promise he had made, how he had worked tirelessly to help her save her ranch, how he had never once made her feel lesser or dependent despite her desperate circumstances when they met. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, you can court me. But slowly, Albert. I need to take this slowly." Albert's face lit up with a smile that made Hannah's breath catch. "As slowly as you need. I have already waited this long. I can wait longer." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender that Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, still holding hands, not needing words to communicate the depth of their feelings. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Hannah had experienced before. Thomas had courted her when she was 18, but that had been a perfunctory affair, more of a business arrangement between their fathers than a romance. With Albert, everything was different. He brought her wildflowers from the mountain meadows and left them on her doorstep. He took her on picnics to beautiful spots around the ranch. He read poetry to her in the evenings and asked her opinion on everything from politics to philosophy. But more than the romantic gestures, what won Hannah's heart was the way Albert treated her as an equal partner in every decision. When they needed to decide which cattle to sell and which to keep for breeding, he asked her opinion and genuinely listened to her thoughts. When they discussed expanding the ranch, he made sure she was comfortable with every plan before proceeding. He never talked down to her or dismissed her concerns, and he openly acknowledged that she knew aspects of ranching that he did not. As spring turned to summer, their ranch prospered in ways Hannah had never imagined possible. Word spread about the quality of their horses and cattle, and buyers began seeking them out specifically. They sold a 3-year-old gelding for nearly double what they had expected, and a rancher from 2 valleys over paid premium price for 2 of their bred heifers. "We are doing it," Albert said one evening as they reviewed their accounts. "We are actually building something here." "We are," Hannah agreed, feeling a surge of pride. "I never imagined the ranch could be this successful." "That is because you were doing it alone before, with a partner who was not pulling his weight," Albert said. Now you have a real partner." Hannah looked at him, at this man who had appeared in her life at her lowest moment and helped her build something better than she had ever dreamed possible. "Albert, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention. "I love you," Hannah said simply. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid to feel it, but I cannot deny it anymore. I love you, and I want you to know that." Albert's expression transformed, joy and relief flooding his features. He stood and came around the table, pulling Hannah to her feet and into his arms. "I love you too," he said against her hair. "I have loved you for months, but I have been trying to be patient, trying not to pressure you." Hannah pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I do not need more patience. I need you to kiss me." Albert did not need to be asked twice. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as Hannah pressed closer. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not even known she was missing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Albert said. "I know it is soon. I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me, Hannah. Be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children. Build this life with me." Hannah's first instinct was to say they should wait, that it was too soon, that people would be scandalized by a woman remarrying less than a year after her divorce. But then she thought about how short life was, how quickly everything could change. She had wasted 8 years in a loveless marriage. She did not want to waste any more time being cautious when she could be happy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in June of 1877 in a simple ceremony in Georgetown, with only the lawyer and his wife as witnesses. Some people in town did talk, scandalized by the speed of Hannah's remarriage, but most were kinder than she had expected. Her hard work and respectability, combined with the obvious circumstances of her first husband's betrayal, earned her more sympathy than censure. The wedding night was nothing like Hannah's first. Thomas had been perfunctory and selfish in bed, treating intimacy as his right rather than a shared pleasure. Albert was different in every way. He was patient and attentive, making sure Hannah was comfortable and satisfied. Their lovemaking was a revelation to Hannah, who had not known physical intimacy could be so pleasurable and emotionally connecting. In the days and weeks that followed, Hannah and Albert settled into married life with an ease that surprised her. They worked together seamlessly, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management, and by the end of summer, they had paid off the entire mortgage and had money left over to invest in expansion. "We should buy the Peterson place," Albert suggested one evening. "Old man Peterson wants to retire and move to Denver to live with his daughter. His land adjoins ours on the north side. If we bought it, we would have nearly 200 acres total." Hannah considered the idea carefully. The Peterson ranch was smaller and less developed than theirs, but the land was good. "Can we afford it? If we are careful, and if we can negotiate a fair price, yes," Albert said. "It would mean tight finances for a while, but in the long run, it would make us one of the larger operations in the valley." "Then let us do it," Hannah said decisively. "Let us build something really substantial." They bought the Peterson ranch in September, using most of their savings but gaining valuable grazing land and a small herd of additional cattle. The work of managing the expanded operation was intense, and they hired 2 ranch hands to help with the daily labor. Hannah found herself in the unfamiliar but deeply satisfying role of employer, managing workers and making major business decisions. As autumn arrived and Hannah and Albert celebrated a year since they had first met, Hannah reflected on how completely her life had changed. She had gone from abandoned and nearly destitute to prosperous and deeply in love. She had discovered strengths in herself she had not known existed and had built a life on her own terms. "What are you thinking about?" Albert asked one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset as had become their habit. "About how different everything is from last year," Hannah said. "About how Thomas's betrayal, which seemed like the worst thing that could happen, actually turned out to be a blessing." "I am sorry you had to go through that pain," Albert said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "But I am grateful it brought you to me." Hannah leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you had not offered to help me that day?" "Every day," Albert admitted. "And every day I am grateful I was brave enough to take that chance." In November, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little trepidation. A baby would mean more work and less flexibility, but it would also mean their family would be complete. "I hope it is a boy," Albert said, his hand resting gently on Hannah's still flat stomach. "A son to help run the ranch." "What if it is a girl?" Hannah asked, amused. "Then we will have a daughter who can do anything a son could do," Albert said firmly. "I will not raise children who think there are things women cannot do. Not after watching you build all this." Hannah felt her eyes fill with tears, hormones making her more emotional than usual. "You are going to be an amazing father." "I am going to try," Albert said. "I want our children to grow up secure and loved and confident that they can achieve anything they set their minds to." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Hannah continued working almost until the very end, only reluctantly reducing her activities as she grew larger and more ungainly. Albert hovered over her protectively, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous until Hannah finally had to remind him firmly that she was pregnant, not fragile. Their son was born in June of 1878, delivered by a midwife in the bedroom of the ranch house. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Albert, waiting anxiously in the other room, feared for both Hannah and the baby. But in the end, both mother and child came through healthy and strong. They named him Andrew Theodore Norwood, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Albert held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Hannah, who lay exhausted but happy in the bed. "Thank you for him, for everything, for choosing to build this life with me." "Thank you for showing me what love really means," Hannah replied. "Thank you for being the partner I never knew I needed." As baby Andrew grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for producing exceptional working horses. Their cattle herd grew year by year, and they became known throughout the region for quality livestock. Albert proved to be as good a father as Hannah had known he would be, involved and affectionate with Andrew in a way that Thomas had never been with anyone. In the spring of 1880, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, their daughter Elizabeth was born after an easier labor, a tiny, perfect creature with her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined chin. Andrew, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping care for her. "We have built a good life," Hannah said one evening, as she and Albert sat on the porch, watching Andrew play in the yard, while Elizabeth slept in her cradle beside them. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real." "It is real," Albert assured her. "You made it real by being brave enough to start over when everything fell apart. I just helped." "You did more than help," Hannah corrected. "You showed me what a real partnership looks like. You taught me that I could be strong and independent and still be loved." Albert reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of years together. "You taught me that taking chances on people is worth the risk, that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The ranch spread around them, nearly 300 acres now, after they had bought another adjoining property. The herds were strong, the buildings well-maintained, the land productive. But more than the physical prosperity, what filled Hannah with contentment was the knowledge that she had built this with someone who truly valued her as an equal. As the years passed, the Norwood Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the Georgetown area. Hannah and Albert added 2 more children to their family, a son named Matthew, born in 1882, and another daughter, Clara, born in 1884. The children grew up knowing that their mother was as much a rancher as their father, and they absorbed the lesson that gender did not determine what a person could achieve. Andrew showed early promise with horses, spending hours in the corrals with his father, learning the intricacies of training. Elizabeth had her mother's head for business and would sit with Hannah going over the accounts, asking precocious questions about profit margins and breeding strategies. Matthew was fascinated by cattle, studying the herd with an intensity that made Albert laugh, and little Clara, still too young to show clear interests, nevertheless insisted on following her parents everywhere, determined not to be left out of anything. In 1885, Hannah received a letter from Denver. It was from a lawyer she did not know, informing her that Thomas Foster had died of pneumonia. The letter explained that Thomas had left minimal assets, most of which would go to the woman he had been living with who had borne him a child. But there was a small amount, about $300, that legally should go to Hannah as his first wife since there had never been a legal second marriage. Hannah showed the letter to Albert that evening after the children were in bed. "I do not want his money," she said. "Taking it feels wrong somehow." "Then do not take it for yourself," Albert suggested. "Take it and do something good with it. Give it to the church or to the school or to some widow who needs help the way you once did." Hannah thought about that and smiled. "That is perfect. There is a widow in town, Mrs. Patterson. Her husband died in a mining accident last month. She has 3 children and no means of support. I will give it to her." And she did, presenting the money to the astonished Mrs. Patterson with the simple explanation that she had once been in a similar situation and had received help that saved her life. The gift allowed Mrs. Patterson to open a small boarding house that eventually became quite successful. As the 1880s progressed into the 1890s, Hannah and Albert watched their children grow and the ranch evolve. Andrew married a local girl in 1896 and brought her to live at the ranch, building a small house on the northern section of the property. Elizabeth, independent and fierce, shocked the family by announcing she wanted to go to college, something almost unheard of for women at the time. Hannah and Albert mortgaged part of the ranch to pay for her education, believing fiercely in her right to pursue knowledge. "Are we doing the right thing?" Albert asked Hannah the night before Elizabeth was to leave for Colorado College in the Colorado Springs. "People think we are crazy educating a girl." "People thought we were crazy to let women be full partners in ranching too," Hannah reminded him. "But we have proven them wrong. Elizabeth will prove them wrong about this as well." And she did, graduating with honors in 1900, with a degree in literature and returning to Georgetown to open a school for girls, determined to give other young women the opportunities she had been blessed with. On a summer evening in 1901, Hannah and Albert sat on their porch, now weathered and worn from decades of use. They were both in their 50s, graying and lined, but still strong and active. Around them, their empire spread, nearly 500 acres now, 200 head of cattle, a stable of horses that were sought after throughout Colorado. But more than the physical success, they had created a family, a legacy of strength and partnership that their children carried forward. "Do you remember the day we met?" Hannah asked, her hand in Albert's as it had been countless times over the years. "Every detail," Albert said. "You were standing by your wagon looking lost and broken, and I knew I had to help you." "You did more than help me," Hannah said softly. "You showed me how to help myself. You gave me back my life." "We gave each other everything that matters," Albert corrected. "A partnership, a family, a love that has lasted through everything." Andrew and his wife were expecting their 3rd child, due any day now. Elizabeth was engaged to a young professor she had met at college, a man who respected her intelligence and independence. Matthew was courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and even young Clara, now 17, was showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen and her father's way with horses. "We did it," Hannah said, looking out over the land they had built together. "We took disaster and turned it into something beautiful." "You did it," Albert said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it as he had done so many times over the years. "I just had the incredible good fortune to be here to watch and help." Hannah turned to him, her eyes full of love and contentment. "No, we did it together. That is the point. Partnership. From that very first day in the restaurant to now, we built all of this together as equals." As the stars came out over the Colorado mountains and the evening breeze whispered through the pines, Hannah Foster Norwood reflected on the 25 years since that terrible morning in the bank when her world had collapsed. She thought about the fear and pain she had endured, the risks she had taken, the choices that had shaped her life. And she thought about Albert, the cowboy who had offered help with no guarantee of return, and who had stayed to build a fortune and a family and a love story that would endure for generations. Their grandchildren would play on this porch, would ride these horses, would learn the lessons of hard work and partnership, and treating everyone as equals regardless of gender. The ranch that Hannah had almost lost would provide for her family for decades to come. But more important than the material success was the example they had set. That disaster could be overcome, that true partnership was possible, and that love based on mutual respect and equality could last a lifetime. As they sat together in the deepening twilight, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace. The girl who had stood devastated in the bank so many years ago could never have imagined this future. But that girl had found the courage to start over, to trust again, and to build something lasting with a man who saw her as an equal partner in all things. "I love you," Hannah said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Albert replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Always have, always will." And as the night settled over their ranch, over the land they had worked and the family they had raised and the fortune they had built together, Hannah knew that, despite the pain that had brought them together, she would not change a single moment of the journey, because it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life that was exactly what she had always deserved but had never known to dream of. The next morning brought news that Andrew's wife had delivered a healthy baby boy, their first grandson. The whole family gathered at Andrew's house to celebrate, 3 generations of Norwoods filling the rooms with laughter and love. Albert held his grandson carefully, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features. "What will you name him?" Hannah asked her daughter-in-law. "We were thinking Albert," Andrew said, looking at his father with emotion clear in his eyes. "After the man who built all of this and taught me what it means to be a good father and husband." Albert's eyes filled with tears, and Hannah felt her own throat tighten. "That is a beautiful honor," she said softly. As the family celebrated around them, Hannah caught Albert's eye across the room and smiled. He smiled back, that same warm smile that had helped her trust him 25 years ago, when she had been too hurt and scared to trust anyone. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and partnership and equality. In the years that followed, Hannah and Albert gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to their children, though they never fully retired. They remained active and involved, offering guidance and wisdom, but allowing the younger generation to make their own decisions and their own mistakes. They traveled together for the first time in their lives, visiting Denver and Colorado Springs, and even taking a trip to San Francisco that left them both amazed at how much the world was changing. But they always returned to the ranch, to the mountains they loved, and the home they had built together. And on summer evenings, you could find them on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, still as much in love as they had been in those early days when they were learning to trust each other. Hannah lived to see all 4 of her children happily married, to know a dozen grandchildren, and even 3 great-grandchildren. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Andrew's management, saw Elizabeth's school become a respected institution that educated hundreds of young women, saw Matthew build his own successful cattle operation, and saw Clara marry a lawyer and become an advocate for women's rights. When Hannah passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1920 at the age of 72, with Albert holding her hand and her children gathered around her bed, her last words were simple. "Thank you for everything. It was a beautiful life." Albert followed her 6 months later, his heart broken by the loss of his beloved partner. But he went peacefully, knowing that they had built something lasting, that their love story would live on in their children and grandchildren, and in the ranch that still bore their name. The Norwood Ranch continued to operate for another 50 years, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked as true equals, when they faced adversity with courage, and when they loved each other with their whole hearts. And in the family stories passed down through generations, Hannah and Albert's story became legend, the tale of a woman who lost everything and found the courage to start over, and the cowboy who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, who helped her build not just a fortune, but a life worth living. Their story was one of resilience and redemption, of trust earned and love freely given, of partnership in the truest sense of the word. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest blessings, that disaster can be the beginning rather than the end, and that true love is built not on grand gestures but on daily choices to support, respect, and cherish your partner. And though Hannah and Albert had been gone for generations, their legacy lived on, in the land they had worked, in the children they had raised, in the example they had set of what marriage and partnership could be at its very best. Their story proved that fortune was not just measured in money or land, but in love freely given and returned, in family bonds that lasted beyond death, and in a life lived with courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to treating everyone as equals. The ranch house still stood decades later, weathered but strong, a monument to what could be built when 2 people joined their strengths rather than one person dominating the other. And visitors who knew the story would stand on that old porch and imagine Hannah and Albert sitting there together, hands intertwined, watching the sunset over the mountains they loved, living proof that love could triumph over betrayal and that true partnership could create something lasting and beautiful that would echo through the generations.